Hello, and welcome to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast with your hosts, Brent Aiken, David Pruitt, and Russell Martin. This podcast is all about equipping, encouraging, and inspiring youth pastors weekly with topics that are brought to the table by youth pastors from all over the world. And now, here's your host for this week, Brent Aiken. Hey, and welcome to the podcast. If this is your first time listening to us, we want to welcome you and invite you over to our website, studentministryconversations.org. There you can find all of our previous episodes, our show notes, and blog articles. Our goal with this is that you are inspired, encouraged, and equipped to be a better student pastor for the church that you're serving in. That has been the goal from day one, and we are still going with it. And so today we are sitting down with a good buddy of mine, Vernon King. Excited to have him on the show, and honestly excited for the topic that he's going to bring to the table. But before we get to that, Vernon, why don't you tell us a little bit about you, history, background, whatever you want to share, and then we'll go into the conversation.
Man, Brent, thank you so much for having me today, man. I'm Vernon King from Dallas, Texas, currently living in Snyder, Texas, and graduate from Fort Hays State University. Well, Duncanville High School first. I got to mention my high school because they're pretty legit, all right? All around sports and everything else, but then moved to Kansas to Fort Hays State University. Graduated with a bachelor's there, communications, also in psychology. And then went to the Chicago School for a master's in psychology. Then DTS, Dallas Theological Seminary, for divinity. So really digging deep in theology as well. So my main passion is just, theology, but also mental health and combining the science of those two for the human brain.
Yeah, man, that's a lot of school. But with that being said, it's awesome. I love it. I think for a lot of people, especially when you get into youth ministry, they don't really consider the educational aspect of it, of like putting in the study hours, putting in the research hours, putting in like the desire to know more, to do more. And I think that is, that could be an episode in and of itself. And that might be something we come back and talk at another time. But today we are actually talking about a conversation that I've never had on the podcast. This is going to be probably in the 170s-ish on episode release. And I don't think we've ever actually talked about the conversation of, students and basically being exposed to sexuality and being exposed to pornography and being exposed to all those different things. And so that's where we're going today. But more than anything with this, we also brought you in because Vernon has a book coming out about this. And the book is called The Intimacy and Sex Conversation. And so why don't you kind of give us a brief overview of the whole book, like just the mindset and the heart behind it. And then we can maybe move into the reasoning on why this book was such an important and needed thing in our culture today.
Absolutely. So basically the Intimacy and Sex Conversation, over the past 16 years, I've been youth pastoring, or as my formal title is a next-gen pastor, which, I would oversee, counsel, mentor, families, and specifically teenagers from the age of around 10, 11, up till about 35, because that would include both high schoolers, middle schoolers, and also young adults as well. And so my time working with those high school and middle school students, man, I've heard some pretty scary, we're going to call it scary, concerning stories from these middle schoolers and teenagers in regards to their sex journey and their exposure to the just the illegitimate sexual realm that surrounds us every day. And so from that, I learned that parents just have no clue. They have no clue of what their children are being exposed to and encountering on a daily basis. both on a physical side and through tech. And so the reason for the book was to really help parents understand not only what their children are being exposed to today and what they're encountering today in regards to sex and intimacy, but to also give them some direction, some guidance on how to come behind their children, support their children, enlighten their children before the world does. One of the quotes in the book says, if you haven't started talking to your children about intimacy and sex, the world has already begun. So that's kind of the vision and the goal behind the book, is to really make sure parents understand the lingo, how to address, and how to keep that relationship open between them and their children, so that their children want to talk to their parents about these things.
Yeah, no, and I mean, from my time in youth ministry, from my current newfound experience as a parent of a junior high student, this is something that is absolutely pivotal. And having these conversations is huge. And like you said, if you're not having them, they're already going to be happening. So specifically in this book, I mean, obviously you do your research, and you went through different studies, and had a team that went through a bunch of different investigative strategy, kind of just seeing the overall issue and the problem. So I guess my first question would be, I don't even know if I want to ask this, because I think it's such a smack in the face awareness issue that like everybody knows it's a problem. But like, what is the overarching, I guess, reasoning behind this book, and why do we need to confront it and maybe work to combat it earlier and earlier? Because like you said, the world is doing their best efforts in the same light.
That's a really good question, Brent. Thank you for asking that question. After hearing these stories and having these conversations with students, here are some scary results. We surveyed almost 1,100 students from different backgrounds, different races, different religions, and some of the same problems existed within those different demographics. What we found was teen pregnancy is now at an all-time high. We found that the exposure to pornography is now at an all-time high in regards to the age of exposure and the age of an addicted child to pornography. Also, sexual encounters at an all-time high, because there's multiple ways of communication and meetups, and even if it's sex through tech, there's a plethora of doors that children can walk through today to have that type of experience. And so the biggest reason for my heart and my team's heart behind this book is to make sure parents understand that there is nothing in the world that can keep their children from encountering these different exposing mechanisms in the areas of intimacy and sex. There is nothing. But what they can do is prepare them, educate them, and make sure they understand a biblical system for intimacy and sex, so that their children are not harmed when they are engaging in intimacy and sex. So basically, we just want parents to understand it starts with you. There is nothing, no other entity, nothing else. It starts with you. And it's a guide for parents.
Yeah, no, and I definitely see the need and feel like that is something that not only has been needed for a while, but it's something that quite honestly has kind of been overlooked. I don't know if overlooked is the right word, but I think people are just scared about it. I think they're scared that they're
Yeah.
going to not have the right words. I think they're scared that they're going
Yep.
to have maybe wrong thoughts or wrong outlooks when it comes to how
Mm-hmm.
these things are perceived. But education and just getting the word out and getting the understanding and the ideas behind what is available, what resources are being used prevalently. All of these different things are, I think, huge when it comes to understanding A, the situation we're in, and B, how to best combat it, which is what your work is doing. And so, specifically, as we
Yeah.
move into the conversation more, what I don't necessarily need like a chapter by chapter list or anything, but what are some of the things that
Mm-hmm.
you specifically build conversation around for the chapters in your book?
Yeah. And if you don't mind, Brent, I would love to just, if I could speak on that little part you said earlier. I think parents are just scared. You're right. Here's what we found when we studied parents and why they either hadn't begun to have that conversation or why the conversation didn't meet the level of the child's experience when they had the conversation with the child.
Yeah.
Parents don't know really what is out there targeting their children. They don't know how their children are being targeted. So when I'm talking to parents, they're like, okay, my son is 12. There's no way he's ready to have the conversation about like oral sex. I mean, I just need to talk to him about the birds and the bees. Oh no. Oh man. And so that's kind of what we do in the book is we say, okay, at this age level, they need to be hearing this
Yeah.
because they're seeing this, and this through these different channels. And so when you said the parents just don't know, they're just scared, you're absolutely right. Like who thinks they need to talk to their 7-year-old daughter about pornography? Who thinks like that? So early. And that's what we encourage parents to do according to the age of their children, so that they know, hey, I don't think they're ready for this conversation, but because of the research behind this book, we're going to have these real conversations with children.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to kind of just briefly just throw that out there because to the parents, man, listen, I'm telling you, you may not think they're ready for some of these conversations, but they're advanced. Okay. You asked about some of the chapters and what we discussed. In the book, we talk about masturbation. And everything in the book is from a biblical worldview. Okay. So, of course, other religions, other, practices may have a different take on some of these issues and concerns in regards to intimacy and sex. But I do the best I can to come from a biblical worldview. That's where that theology comes in, but also from a realistic point of view. That's where that psychology comes in, merging the two. Because we always want to honor God with our conversation with our children and how we're telling them to go about in regards to the journey of intimacy and sex. So we talk about masturbation, we talk about pornography, we talk about dating. What kind of dating boundaries, advice you should be giving your children at what age? We talk about terminology. What type of terminology should you be using with your children? They may not understand the word fellatio, but they have definitely heard blowjob a million times. And so, how do you make sure you are having the right conversations, using the right terminology with your children at the appropriate age? And we also go over some theology around intimacy and sex. That's a few chapters. What does the Bible have to say about sex? What does the Bible have to say about intimacy? So I spend a lot of time digging through that as well.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the approaches that needs to happen because I mean ultimately I think in anything if we're trying to change a situation or if we're
Mm-hmm.
trying to change a circumstance, the way forward has to be presented first and foremost. And so if we want a
So
more
good.
biblical understanding of what the place of intimacy and
Yeah.
sex is in our worldview, like the biblical approach has to be set as a preface to the rest of the conversation. So, very, very good.
Absolutely.
So, just kind of in a nutshell, I mean, you sent me information about the book, and I've had time to kind of look through it and see different avenues and aspects of it. One of the big things that you kind of start the book off with, and I really think this was kind of a cool deal, and I'm sure there's a massive correlation with this, but
Hmm.
you do testimonials, and you talk about
Yeah.
how children who didn't have the intimacy talks and children that did have the intimacy talks and the difference in how they corresponded with their future choices. And so, tell us a little bit about that as we kind of get into the conversation of, what do the kids actually like? How is there a
Yeah.
positive outcome out of this?
So when we did our surveys with the students and focus groups, we had 17 focus groups with a few hundred students. We asked them if they could share in their submission posts whether or not they had that conversation. If they did they find it helpful? If they didn't, what are some areas in intimacy and sex that they believe they struggled because they didn't know anything about it. So we got some testimonials, and these kids were so open and transparent. We are discreet with like their full information. We put their first name and the age of the children in the book. We have 13-year-olds to 14-year-olds. We have a male 22. We got a female who's 12. One young girl who was 11 who basically said, "Yeah, I have engaged in hand sex multiple times, um, but I thought that was completely normal. I didn't think that that was a form of sex. I just thought it was like kissing." And so, hearing, because she had heard a sermon of what sex is and what it encompasses, she then heard that, okay, this is a form of intimacy and sex. And so, but she just thought it was like, kissing. Like, this is what we do. We're boyfriend and girlfriend now, so we can touch each other in private parts and stuff. That's not sex. So she said her parents have never talked to her about sex, and she would never talk to her parents about sex because she just said that she saw how they were with her older sister with her boyfriends, and she said she would never engage in a conversation about sex with her parents. And so it's testimonies like that. Noah, age 14, said he lost his virginity at 13, and um, he was scared about getting pregnant, but he didn't know quite exactly where condoms were, how to go get them, or his parents never talked to him about condoms, and he didn't know why God even cared about sex happening before marriage. So him and his girlfriend skipped school one day, and they got some Saran wrap and had sex, and he said that his girlfriend and him was scared for a couple weeks because some of the semen seeped out of the saran wrap, and so he said he was panicking. He couldn't play sports well. He couldn't go to class. He was scared. He was asking his girlfriend, like, "Are you pregnant? Are you pregnant?" And I mean, it's just things like that our kids are, that these children are really, kind of dealing with every day, that they have no clue. So we hear those testimonies in the book. I put those in the book.
Yeah, no, and I think that kind of puts a real life approach to it. It's no longer just a
Yeah,
statistic. This is this kid that had this issue, and like this
yeah,
is why they don't want to have conversations with their parents, or this is the kid
yeah.
that did have the conversation with their parents early, and now they haven't, and they're looking out for not only themselves but their friends, and just they
Yeah,
have more of an in-depth understanding of why that conversation needs to
understanding.
happen. And so, obviously,
Yeah,
something with this though, and I think this is a massive, massive issue, and anybody would agree with that problem. But I think sometimes we just kind of use it as this catch-all reason why our kids are struggling with this. And so, one of the other things you talk about is pornography. Like, You see it in
Yeah.
movies, you see it in TV, you see it in
Mm-hmm.
advertising,
Yep.
you see it in you
Yep.
see it online, you see it in video games, you see pretty much anywhere, everywhere. There's readily available content. But when we come into this conversation, I guess how do we work towards the understanding of A, letting the kids know it's an issue, B, educating parents to where they can kind of evaluate the depth of where that kid is, and then I guess find
Yep.
a road to recovery when it comes to just dealing with the situation.
Well, Brent, everything you just said is exactly how it's laid out in that chapter in the book. The exposure, the pattern of porn that it on children, the exposure pattern to children, determining the level of porn exposure or addiction that a child is experiencing already. And then lastly, what are some strategic methods for parents on how they can address, support, and guide their children through porn addiction and recovery? Of those, that's how the whole chapter is laid out. One of the things that I'm very passionate about is recovery in regards to really any type of addiction as a mental health advocate, but really porn addiction. The effects of porn that it has on the brain, of course, we know what the Bible says. And I do want to just say this right here. Parents, your kids know what God has to say about sex and porn. They know whether or not it's right or wrong. Usually at the age of 10, they're pretty clear. Sometimes there may be some areas where they're not, but they know what God has to say. So this is not a faith thing. This is not they don't. I need to tell them what God says. They know what God says. Just like they know what you say in regards to the bedtime. They don't go to bed on time, do they? They're just dealing with flesh, temptation, and so what I'm really passionate about in regards to recovery and addiction is helping a child that has not only been exposed, but we see a pattern of addiction, helping them recover. I have a little bit of an unorthodox method. Now, I grew up in a Pentecostal church where we, believed in healing and restoration and divine healing, and immediately where and I've seen that happen. From a theological perspective, if you ask me, do I believe that a person can immediately, through prayer or even fasting or any type of divine encounter with the Lord, be immediately healed and recover from pornography if it's at an addictive level? I will tell you, yes. But if you also ask me the same question, are there cases where maybe there's not going to be an immediate divine healing, where there must be like a process that we can help them go through to get better in the area? I would say absolutely. Why? Well, in the Bible, there are times when we read about immediate healing and deliverance and miracles. But we also read, like with Paul, who said, look, while he wrote majority of the New Testament, he said, I still do the things I know I shouldn't do. I know I shouldn't do them, but I do them anyway. The things that I want to do, I can't even do because I'm still operating in my flesh. And so if Paul is speaking about trying to fight this battle and overcome a lifestyle, whatever they may have been, as he was writing the Bible of faith, an encounter with Jesus, then of course we may find that some of our children as well are in that constant battle in regards to really any addiction, but since we're talking about pornography as well. So in the book, I go through a recovery method that I believe teens, girls and guys, can apply and practice, where they will see positive results in a 3-month period where pornography is not dictating their emotions, attitude, and behavior patterns.
Yeah, and so without getting too much into that, because obviously we don't want to spoil the
Yeah.
book. What is that recovery like? What are the steps of that recovery process look like?
Well, the first thing is I just always tell parents that having these open communication, these conversations with your children about sex and intimacy, period, are necessary on a weekly basis right now. We're not talking about a 1 month table talk. We're talking about like once a week at the dinner table, be like, all right, guys, what do y'all want to ask about sex? What do you want to hear about sex? What's the porn levels like? Are we watching porn? Are we not? There's no trouble here. Let's just talk about it. We gotta start having those conversations. So the first step is don't think your children are going to talk to you about their porn exposure if you're not having these conversations on a regular basis. Okay? So that's the first step. Have these conversations. Second step, communicate clearly that they will not get in any form of trouble. They will not be punished. They will not be in any form or fashion. I'll go a little bit deeper on this in the book. But the reason why your children can tell people like me and Brent, youth pastors, all their dirty laundry, because we don't punish them. Okay? We pray for them. We walk with them. We support them. In the area of intimacy and sex, parents, I would just suggest so that your children can talk to you about what they're being exposed to and encountering the second step, communicate that they will not get in trouble unless it's just blatant rebellious and disrespect. Okay? In regards to the sex and intimacy conversation. The third step that I would just suggest is that if you find out your children have watched porn, but they're not, the patterns aren't addicting, which I go over there in the book on how you can tell, then I would just make sure that you help them understand the times when they watch it. What are those triggers? When do you find yourself watching porn? Asking questions. When do you find yourself, okay, is it at night, morning? Like, when do you find yourself watching them? Watching porn. And once you discover that, then maybe you may be able to make some connections on what's kind of leading them to that space. It could be TV shows they're watching before bed. It could be who they're on the phone with before bed, or just anything you could probably make connections to. If you find out that they're at an addictive level, my advice would be there's a process in the book, and it's called a real recovery. This will include steps that you can help your children go through so that they, I think the term that most people are familiar with, so that they can wean off of pornography. There are some steps in there where it helps them when they do start, when they're in that mindset and space where they're not Googling, some of those categories that are very bad for the brain. But maybe a different type of search that, there's no porn that's healthy, but a different type of search that is not as harmful to the brain. The number of times a week, there's a process in there for that. Some of the students in our surveys, they said they were watching it up to 45 times a week, multiple times a day. And so helping them wing that process, all right, well, we're going to try not to go over 35 for the next month and a half. Can we shoot for that goal? And then when you find yourself in that space, what are you watching? I go through a whole process. I've had 137 students go through a real recovery that were porn addicted, and 137 students either experienced a progress where they were addicted and they don't watch it as much, and it doesn't have so much control over their behavior and attitude, or they're completely 100% done with pornography. And so it's a recovery method that works. Some friends of mine, counselors of mine, other pastors of mine got together, and we thought about this thing through. We had some trial and errors, but we believe it's now at a place where if your children are addicted to porn, they can go through these steps, and they will walk in deliverance.
That's awesome, and it's needed for sure. And I think that was one of the signs that we've seen over the course of the past even 20, 30 years when you're looking at kids and the increasing exposure and the increasing availability of that, with parents not really understanding how. Because even when you're looking at like I'm 34 years old. When you're looking at me 20 years ago in the beginnings of freshman year, something to that nature, um, the understanding and the reality behind that culture was, oh, I had magazines, like I
Yes.
kind of thing like that, and they didn't
Yep.
understand the complexities and the overabundance of accessibility that is available today. And so I think that's one of the things that's very very there was, I guess, ignorance was bliss, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah. Makes
now
total
we're I
sense.
think we're getting into the stage now to where we have parents that understand the availability and understand and
Yep.
have awareness as far as how much there is out in the world. And so hopefully
Oh yeah.
that helps to kind of conform this mentality and shift this focus into, maybe it's not, like you said, as much of a punishment, but it's, hey, let's walk to get you out of this,
Absolutely.
which is a
Yeah.
great way to handle any of those situations. And like you said, the whole difference between them talking to their youth pastor or them talking to your parent is like, we don't ground them when they're done talking to us like parents would. And so I think with
Yeah.
that, there's
Yeah.
a vital understanding for any parents that listen to
Hmm.
this, or anybody that picks up this book as a recommendation for parents. Just this mindset of like, punishment cannot be the ultimatum in this regard, because you're just going to push them to where they hide it. Um,
Absolutely.
and
For
so,
sure.
and
Yeah.
yeah, so with that though, I think that is obviously one of the biggest concerns when it comes to, um, I guess, children or students in this day and age, and their discovery or exposure to sexuality, is that pornography mindset or that aspect of pornography. But obviously, with another
Yeah.
side of it, there is a big side, that we also really don't discuss much. And so you also said that you go into the discussion on masturbation. And so, from
Yes.
just brief
Yeah.
overview of what exactly you're talking about specifically and how that is addressed in the book.
Well, so um, thanks for asking that question as well. This one is like the biggest elephant in the room, but no one knows how to address. I mean, I've been with parents, pastors, and I've been to conferences where they ask, "Is masturbation a sin? Can you masturbate? What does the Bible have to say about masturbation?" And also surprisingly, parents are shocked to learn that what age kids really start masturbating. And so this is one of the most important chapters in the book as well. I start off this chapter just by telling a biblical worldview about masturbation. Okay, and it's not something you have to wait for the book to come out to hear. Um, the Bible just doesn't address masturbation um, like like he does in his word about other intimacy and sex um, practices. But there are some principles that are there. One is I don't know if a person can really masturbate without thinking of lustful thoughts and things that the Bible tells us we should rid our minds from. Um, there's also healthy context in masturbation in regards to sex. In the book, when your kids are, I think it says from 16 up, we talk about all forms of sex that is okay within the framework of marriage, and that is the practice of masturbation. If done between you and your partner, there is a healthy biblical way that you can engage in masturbation. But then I talk about the real deal about masturbation. And here's the real deal. Out of our surveys, we surveyed 1,100 students and 900 parents. The ages that of the students was from 10 all the way to 35. All the parents, we did about 903 parents to be exact, 903. Out of all those individuals, so that's about a total of 1,100 plus 900. Now, ask me about the Bible, but math. What is that, 2,000?
Yeah,
Almost
right at
2,000
2,000.
people. Like 2,003 people. Only 4 said they have never, out of 4 people, out of that number, 4 people, 2 said they had never masturbated. The other 2 said they've masturbated once or twice in their lifetime. Everyone else said it was a daily, weekly, or monthly practice.
Wow.
That's the real deal.
Wow.
Out of 2,003 people, only 4 said that it wasn't something they did on a regular basis. Now, of course, some of those parents were married, and they expressed how it's a practice within the marriage bed. The marriage bed is not defiled, so hey, okay. But everybody else, it was either an addictive thing, it was either something that was a stress relief for them, and so on and so on. So I'm going to say this. In regards to masturbation, I think we understand, if we wanted to add the biblical principles together, whether or not masturbation is okay or not okay. But I think from a real perspective, we must help our children understand not only the science behind masturbation and what that does to your brain and your body before marriage, but also I think there's a way where you can help your children not feel so guilty about masturbating from the perspective of not engaging in sexual encounters with other people. Now, I go through this deeper in the book, but it's important. And it's a real perspective, because I'm not one of those preachers, pastors that's going to be like, oh, just tell your kids that, Jesus wants them to honor him and not masturbate. Listen, sometimes, like with Paul, when he said it was a battle, sometimes they need more direction, okay? So in regards to the masturbation, where they don't feel guilty and they're masturbating, and they are, and from a perspective of, I don't want to have sex with anyone, I do believe that, and again, there's so much more details in the book. I'm just kind of give you the overview here. There is a way that masturbation can be more beneficial than a child who's sexually active, encouraging them to withstand, masturbation, because most of the time, as we see in our results, will end up with them having sex before marriage with another person. So this one is a little bit more packed, but I'm telling you, the research there, the methods to this conversation with your children is there, and it is very beneficial. So, yeah. So I think if I just have to summarize it, it's complicated. Talking about masturbation from a biblical perspective, it's complicated, but it's possible with the right words, the right understanding, and biblical knowledge from a real perspective.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. And it is one of those conversations where, I mean, I'm sure there's 2 sides to the argument, of where it's crystal clear, and then there's others where it's like, this is not really touched on at all. And so just having the awareness and having the knowledge of like what is a biblical approach to it, and then also how can we use this as a rehab conversation to rehabilitate from what's already happening, is very, very important. And so obviously with those two, you also talk about a couple different things, and I don't want to go into every single chapter, but you touch on dating,
Okay.
and I would assume that
Yep.
the dating conversation is going to go in the route of, the expectations of what we just talked about, those two subjects, and how it correlates and corresponds in dating. And
Yep.
there is probably great things with that. But I wanted to kind of push and take a different approach for the last little bit of our conversation.
Okay.
And with that being said, from a more practical aspect of it, obviously this podcast is geared towards student pastors, which you and I both are.
Okay.
And so we have seen the ins and outs of this conversation play out over the past decade or more. While there are it's the same conversations, it's the same issues, just new masks. And so how do we approach this as a youth pastor that maybe doesn't do any conversations about this in their ministry? And then I guess from the other side of the perspective, for the parents listening to this, how do you work to generate those authentic conversations, those real life moments to where this isn't necessarily an issue, or it's not a punishment. It just needs to be raw, open conversation. So as a youth pastor, how do you have these conversations in your group, or do you have these conversations in your group might be a better question. And then from the parent perspective too, like how do you say that these conversations need to be on a close to week basis? How do you begin to implement those conversations in a way that, I think a lot of people are afraid in the mindset of if I begin to talk to my kid about that, I'm going to expose them to things they don't know already.
Yeah.
And so I guess how do you begin the conversation as a parent to where you are safely building those conversational bridges without leading to, I guess, the scaredness of overexposing as well? So let's start with youth pastor, but we're going to direct towards the parent.
Okay. So I do a workshop with youth pastors. My book is, I partner with TBN Ministries. I'm sure you've watched many preachers on the station, and so they have different conferences and things where we get to promote the book and things like that. And one of the sessions that we've done is for youth pastors on how to address these conversations with the parent, the child, and just a overview of the conversation overall. So for youth pastors, here's something that I like to make sure they know first. And I talk about this in chapter 1 of my book. I've had 2 suicides, 3 attempted suicides, and a foster care situation as a result of me mishandling a student of mine confiding in me in regards to intimacy and sex. Let me explain. A young man came to me and told me that he had engaged in sexual activities with another boy, another guy, his age. And I was young in ministry, and you know what? I was like, you know what? I gotta tell the parents. I gotta tell the parents. And I told him, hey, you are not going to be bound by this. This is not your identity. I said, but we gotta tell your mom and dad. And he told me, Pastor Vernon, I'm coming to you because if I tell my mom and dad this, my dad told me I better not ever be gay. You're going to kill me. And I said, I'm sure your dad was over-exaggerating. I brought the parents in, and I did tell the parents about what he had shared with me and some advice, practical, spiritual advice that, I thought that they could use to kind of help him in his journey or whatever. Well, he committed suicide a week later because his dad forced him to move with his uncle. And his uncle had sexually abused him when he was a lot younger. No one knew. In his letter, he told us before he committed suicide. As a youth pastor, I couldn't sleep for a couple of years. I had to get some counseling for that because I felt that his death was on my hands. But it happened again. A young lady who told me that her and her boyfriend had begun having sex, and she got pregnant. She was 3 months pregnant, and she hadn't told her parents yet. And I decided, you know what? Hey, we listen. You can't just not tell your parents that you're pregnant. We got to tell your parents. And so I said, hey, I'm going to give you at least a day or two to tell your parents, because if you don't, I'm concerned about your health and the baby's health. So I told her, if you don't in 3 days, then I will have to tell them for you. That young girl and the child, by way of suicide, died. She killed herself, and of course the baby died as well. She did tell her parents, it was the way they responded, that now I don't believe it was, I believe I could have done things differently. But the way the parents responded was just unrighteous, and I know God wasn't pleased. So for a long time, even her death I felt was on my hands as well. And I've been a youth pastor at mega churches from 20,000 people for over 6, 7, 8 years to small churches with 20 people. So I've had many of these encounters. I've also had issues where situations where the kids come talk to me, where they, please don't tell my parents. If you tell my parents, then this. I've had parents not feed their children because of sexual activities that I made them aware of. So here's the first thing I tell pastors. First, and I know younger pastors in the youth ministry may disagree, but here's what I tell them. I only go to parents under these conditions. 1, the parent has built a relationship with me where I feel that if I share with them something their kid told me in confidence, they will work with me in helping their child recover or overcome whatever it is they're going through.
That's good.
That's number 1. If I don't know you as a parent, guess what? Your daughter could have told me, or son could have told my staff, whatever, that they are engaged in sex. You won't hear a thing. And I'll let parents know this too. I'll tell pastors this. And I'm covered by the federal government and the church. Because I don't have to legally tell you that your kids are engaged in sexual activity unless it's rape or unless they have multiple partners. Okay? When I had that suicide happen, I had to do some research and find out what the law said. We do serve as a counselor. We're biblical counselors. So there's some confidentiality that we can have between ourselves and the child, even if they're below 18. If I find out that a parent is just unruly and, if I find out this, they're not going to hear nothing from me. And I'm covered by the government, the state, and the church. The only way I'll tell parents is if we have that relationship, if there's a criminal activity involved, or if they have multiple sex partners. Because, by the way, when a child is engaged with multiple sex partners, usually it results in death. 9 times out of 10. And multiple sex partners is like 2 or 3 or more. I always try to bring in the parents in a very strategic way in those situations, because those cases, if you just do your own research, they always use it. Any teen death that happens is normally because it's connected to an individual who had multiple sex partners, both girls and guys. Okay, so that's number 1. I'm very selective what I share with parents, how I share it with them, and when I share it with them. Okay, that's number 1. Another thing I tell youth pastors is make sure you have some kind of space to share that, whether your kids can share that information. I know some parents may think or believe that, 1 second, because my phone is ringing. I want to make sure it ends. I don't want this to distract. Can you hear that phone ringing, Brent?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Another thing that I tell youth pastors is to make sure that they have some safe space to for their kids to share and be open. I would love for it to be gender-based. So let your female volunteers open up space of conversations about intimacy and sex. It's in the Bible. So if you're a Bible teaching church, there shouldn't be a topic that you shouldn't share that's in the Bible. And intimacy and sex is one of those topics. So just have a space, small groups, something like that. When you hear these things, oh, Pastor, I'm having sex with my boyfriend or girlfriend, or hey, if I give a blowjob, is that like still considered sex because like it's not private parts, like into private parts, and that's usually how they come. You got to answer those questions for them, and you discern and decide whether or not you want to bring in the parents. But I will tell you, I've had many conversations with teens. This is why churches, you have to vet the pastors, because youth pastors have an access to the minds and hearts of children that could, if they don't have the heart of God, they will take advantage of the children. I've had many conversations. Hey, me and my boyfriend are talking about, just having oral sex, because it's not really sex, right? Because you can't get pregnant from that, right? I take that moment and I will tell them, here's what the Bible has to say. And then I will bring in the parent. Here's how I do it, youth pastors. Mom, Dad, call me. Let's chat. When they call me, I say, hey, is your child around? If so, call me back. And I start off the conversation like this. What I'm about to tell you, you can't know. It didn't come from me. I'm bringing you in so we can partner to help your child live in a kingdom way. And I'll tell them what I heard, and sometimes they're shocked, sometimes they're sad. I say, get over it, because it's not about you. This is about your daughter who's about to have sex with her boyfriend. So get over it. Dad, calm down. Or this man is about to have sex with your daughter. That's how I approach parents. When I know they'll work with me and they'll keep that confidentiality, I'll work with parents. Ever since those suicides, I haven't really brought in parents and the parents took advantage of the information I gave them where the child hated me because, oh, you told my parents. No, I always do it in a strategic way. So that's kind of how my conversations around youth pastors, you got to have a space for it. Watch out how you involve the parents with this confidential information that these kids are telling you. Because if you tell them, I might have to go talk to your parents about it, you will never hear another thing from them ever. But if you partner with your parents, hey, Mom, Dad, call me. I want to share some things whenever you get a chance so you're not around your children. And you can have those conversations and y'all can partner together. And I have a lot of parents right now that I do that with. Hey, Mom, just talk to your son. He's masturbating like 4 times a week versus 20. He's not Googling all that crazy stuff. He's getting better. And they'll say, all right, Pastor Vernon, thank you. We've also been taking him out for ice cream and things when him and his girlfriend would usually hang out. But since the breakup, we've been taking him out ourselves. And we think it's been helping him watch less porn. His attitude is better. His behavior is better. And I'm like, let's go. That's how we partner with parents. But their child does not even know I talk to their parents on that level.
Yeah.
They think they're calling me, but I'm really partnering with their parents.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's kind of the advice I give to the youth pastors.
Okay.
You asked about parents. How can we start this thing here? Well, first of all, I want to just say real quick, some of y'all need to apologize to your kids. And I put this in the book. Your kids don't want to tell you anything right now because of how you've acted or behaved when they tried to let you in before. Hey, Mom, Dad, I kind of want to kiss my boyfriend. And you got mad at them, upset. You shouldn't even be thinking about that. Well, you need to apologize to your 7-year-old child. Hey, baby girl or son, I want to apologize. I got mad at you the other day when you talked about kissing your boyfriend, your girlfriend. I just don't want you to grow so fast, but I think it's time we have these real conversations, okay? Because I want to know who you want to kiss. I want to know who you're liking and having a crush on. Some of you need to apologize first as parents. If you're a youth pastor out there, sometimes the best advice you can give to parents who have kind of missed the mark in regards to their reaction to their children's behavioral issues or decisions is an apology. So apologize. Hey, when I saw you and your boyfriend, I heard you guys on the phone talking about sex, and I whooped you for that. I spanked you. I, brought out the paddle. I'm sorry. I know sex is something that, the enemy wants to introduce into your life in a very toxic way, and I responded wrong. I'm sorry. Can we have that conversation? Start talking about this a little bit more. I want to support you through it, help you understand the truth about it. So I think the first step is an apology. The second thing is to be transparent. I just had to tell a mom who kicked her daughter out for getting pregnant the other day. I said to the mom, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. Because I knew you when you was in high school. And you was this is a Christian process. You was fast. I said, the way you were with boys, you ought to be ashamed of yourself for you kicking your daughter out because she got pregnant. So I tell parents, be transparent. Hey, I was where you are. Man, I couldn't control my hormones back then, so I want to walk with you. They may say, you had sex before you met dad. Or you had sex before you met mom. I did. And you know what? Here's how that affected me. My heart. Here's how that... Some people got to be transparent.
Yeah.
My first time having sex wasn't even like penetration. It was hand sex or phone sex. And here's how that affected me. Oh my gosh, so you had phone sex with your boyfriend or your first girlfriend? I did. And I thought that was like the love of my life, and it turns out it wasn't. Yeah. And so being transparent is another thing that I talk about in the book on children need that to be able to open to you.
Yeah.
And so those are like the first two things I would just say. Apologize and keep in mind to be transparent, to really usher in a positive conversation around intimacy and sex between you and your children.
Yeah. No, and those are both great. And I mean, obviously there's a ton more to this book we could talk about this probably for another hour or two. But with that being said, It is still a book that you are able to pick up. And so real quick, the book comes out when?
Mm-hmm. So the book will be out officially in October.
Okay.
So October the 15th will be available everywhere. Like I said, TBN, book publishers, I'm very grateful to partner with such a mega ministry who have come behind this book in a big way, monetarily, just marketing, and even there are millions of followers and fans and watchers on TV.
Sure.
Their TV stations every day. And so it'll be out everywhere, all platforms. Anywhere you can buy a book, you can buy this book. And so pre-orders will begin in September. And here in a couple of days, actually, a few days. And then October, you'll be able to pick it up in stores or buy it online.
And that's awesome. No, and I definitely going to be picking up a copy myself just for the sake of this it's a problem that has been readily available for decades now, and it's about time that we work towards addressing it in a biblical way, but also in a correct way. And I think that's something that has missed the mark for a long time. I think that there is a lot of damage when it comes to previous decades of how they've approached this. I personally am not a big fan of the whole purity culture movement, because I don't think they did it. I don't think they did it correctly. And I think from that there has been scars and scars and scars from decades of people.
So true.
That don't know how to have conversations like this because all that did was sweep it under the rug. And so,
so good.
With that being said, this is definitely a book that you need to pick up. It is a book, like I said, that I will personally be reading. And man, Vernon, love you, but it's just last thing on the list. Two things, I guess.
Yeah.
Is
Okay.
what would be a word of inspiration or a word of wisdom to the youth pastor that's listening to this? Doesn't have to be on topic at all. It's just anything that you want to share as a word of wisdom. And then finally, how can people get in contact with you? How can they connect with you? Maybe find out more about the book, or just say hey to you because you're awesome, whatever you want to do. But man, the floor is yours.
Well, I just want to thank all youth pastors. As a youth pastor, addiction pastor myself, I believe that our role is probably not as prevalent in the church as you feel, but biblically, Jesus was a youth pastor. I want you to spend some time and go look at the ages of the disciples. He had a way of doing ministries where teenagers would leave their mother and father and follow him in ministry. Jesus was a youth pastor. And I believe we are in the same position to reach those, that next generation, like Jesus came down here and sought after, who will grow older sharing the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so I just want to encourage you. Things may get rough. The churches may not be approving your budgets like you want them to. You may even feel like, am I really reaching and engaging with these students? I just want to encourage you not to give up. You know, Jesus kept on chasing after his teenagers. He kept on chasing after those young men of valor. Even Peter, who denied him, Jesus came back and said, hey, I'm back. I ain't giving up on you. Do you love me? Do you love me? And he kept chasing after him. So keep chasing after the next generation. Youth pastors, don't give up. They need you. And the things that you're learning, please involve the parents. Educate your parents. Bring them in. Let them know, hey, here's what you need to be doing that's what this book is all about. I want parents to know what I know about this generation so that they can parent their children better.
Yeah.
If you want to reach me, I'm easily findable. Just VernonKingJr.com. The Vernon King Jr. on all social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all that jazz. But website, VernonKingJr.com. You can find out more about the book and more about me and my family. I do have a baby girl that's 8 now, a viral sensation, Harlan Pooh. And so, Brent, I'm just happy to be here, and I'm glad that you wanted to take some time and put me on the podcast. I hear great things about it. You shared some things with me about it. So just thank you, man, for considering me and having me on.
Yeah, appreciate it very, very much, my friend. And for everybody listening, that is all we have for the show. If you were a frequent listener of this podcast, all we ask is that you do your part to get this podcast out to the greater student ministry audience. You can either share this podcast with your youth pastor friends on social media. Maybe there's a specific episode that stuck out to you, or maybe you just want to share the podcast as a whole. Either way, be sure to tag us in that post on your favorite platform at Talk Student Men. And then finally, if you'd like to be like Vernon and be a guest on our show in the future, our podcast does not exist without guests. And so you can reach out to us on social media, or you can send us an email, podcast@studentministryconversations.org. And we would love to set up a time where you can come on the show and share what you're passionate about as well. But Vernon, my friend, this has been an awesome conversation. I can't wait for this book. We need to grab lunch sometime soon. And man, I'm just excited for listeners to hear this one. I'm excited for people to get their hands on this book. And for all that are listening, we hope that you have a great week, and we will see you guys next week.
Thank you.